in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Ride-On Optics. Ride-On is bringing you high-quality glass at a great value. I use and trust their scopes, binoculars, and red dot sights, and you can too with their unconditional lifetime warranty. If you ever have a problem with their gear, they will replace it, not repair it. Finish up your next build and keep a little extra cash on hand for ammo so you can actually go out and shoot that thing. Find your next optic at rideonoptics.com.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. I get asked a lot why military pilots act the way they do when they are out working with support agencies on base.
You people,
right? They act like they are the most important guy in the room and God's gift to the support agencies, and they're smarter than everyone else and better looking. And so I get asked, like, why do they do that? What's the point? And of course, the short answer is a lot of pilots are douchebags.
What?
It just is. There's some real truth there, and I'll be the first to admit it. But there's also some nuance there, and there might be some context and reasoning behind why they are doing what they're doing, right? We've talked in the past about the types of personalities we hire. We tend to hire people who are a little edgy and aggressive and OCD for certain jobs. That's part of it. We hire that kind of douchebaggy personality. But there's more to it even than that. And often I explain this dynamic to the support folks with the analogy of the chicken and the pig. Now, of course, anytime we use an analogy, we are making an imperfect little model of the world to help us understand some complex thing, right? And any analogy, when you take it too far, falls apart. Sheeps, wolves, and sheepdogs, whatever, right? So, support is super important to the mission. You need support to do the mission, any mission, whether it's serving a tasty burger, or launching jet fighters, or doing law enforcement operations, Ops Division South and East and North, whatever. So you need support to make all of those things happen. But there is a level of skin in the game for operations and the operations side of things that support just doesn't experience. Sort of like the different farm animals are committed to breakfast. The chicken is vital to breakfast. Without the chicken, there is no breakfast, right? Needs to lay the eggs or there is no breakfast. But the pig's ass is on the line. The pig makes the bacon, right? Not a perfect analogy, but it's something to think about, right? There's the level of commitment the pig has to breakfast that the chicken doesn't. That level of skin in the game drives a lot of the friction we see between ops and support across military and law enforcement communities.
And the fundamental question in this sort of analogy or discussion is, what actually is ops or operations and what actually is support? I mean, trying to scope and define that a little bit, because we could talk about chickens and pigs all we want, but if you think about what came first, the chicken or the egg, you have to start asking questions like, well, can the ops guys even do their jobs without the support guys? And if they require the support guys to do their jobs, then aren't the support guys essentially part of the operation? Right? Like the operation doesn't happen without the support guys. So it's kind of like Jim is saying, the chicken and pig thing. It's like you have to have eggs to have breakfast. So which one comes first?
Oh, by the way, I just know someone's listening to me like, I don't even eat eggs for breakfast. I eat oatmeal. It's like, that's good. That's good for you. Hang with us on this analogy. Okay, you got this.
Not the point, but yeah. But the whole point is like in Jim's context, as an operations guy to go fly his airplane, without the guy with the fuel truck, it's not getting off the ground.
Where are you going? Nowhere. That's where you're going.
Nowhere. So this is all just, it's a play on words, but the point is that both are essential. And the goal in the distinction is not to over or undersell either one, because they're both vital.
Yeah. And we put lots of labels on things. The military especially can be broken up into lots of categories. But one of the biggest distinctions is between ops in the military and everyone else. And each service has its own slang and official terminology for that, right? There's combat arms, combat support, combat service support in the Army. In the Air Force, you hear ops group, maintenance group, med group, support group. There's also grunts and pogues, persons other than grunts. In DC terms, there's like the tooth to tail ratio, right? There's, I heard, and it's not appropriate anymore because it turns out it comes off a little ethnocentric, but there's the spear or the tip of the spear, and then there's the guy who like throws the spear. So we don't use that terminology anymore, but when you hear tip of the spear or just the tip, just to see how it feels with the spear,
just for a minute,
you got that too, right? But everyone kind of gets that there are people out there doing the doing, and there's this whole organizational machine in the background fixing the equipment and making sure you're getting paid and supplied, and that the gym equipment is working and the computers are working and that the gas is in the planes or the tanks, right? There's this enormous support enterprise, particularly in the military, but I think also in law enforcement, that makes everything else go. And in theory, everyone's got to work together to achieve more. I learned that playing ASO soccer, right? Together, everyone achieves more, the team concept. It's a big deal. And it's a really, really big deal when we're talking about life and death.
Yeah, and it's easy when we talk about law enforcement or the military to say there's the guys with the skin in the game that are out there hacking the mish, and then there's like everybody else. It's easy to make that distinction when we're talking about something like that. But I mean, just consider how your job goes if you're not getting not just paid, but things like you don't have the records personnel or the people answering the 911 calls or the, I don't know, the whole infrastructure that hires and trains people. I mean, just by itself, there's a whole lot that goes into this. And the key lesson in all of it is that everyone works for someone, and who you work for might not be the same as the person you answer to. And those are think about that. Your boss is one thing, but the people that you're actually doing work for is someone different in a lot of cases. So you have both internal and external customers. And that's actually a step further. So you've got the management side of it, where the people you work for and the people you answer to might be different, but you also have internal and external customers. So what I mean by that, and I'll use just my example in this, law enforcement, as a SWAT guy or a K-9 guy, the internal customers are the people calling us for SWAT and K-9 support, but externally we are still serving the public to go grab the bad guys, right? So we have both, and you have to kind of layer everything into that.
And a thing that gets surprisingly confusing is just that, knowing the difference between your customer and your boss. And that sounds easy when we're talking about it on a podcast, but I've actually seen military people get very confused about who they actually answer to, like basic chain of command, command relationships, COMRAIL. So say I'm an A-10 pilot. I'm not, but say I am. The customer for an A-10 pilot is the ground force commander. That's the troops on the ground, right? And the ground force commander represents the troops on the ground. But my boss isn't that. My boss is the air component commander back in the Air Operations Center, who controls all the planes in the operation. Now, I might want to take a risk to protect that ground force, but the air component commander might have some other plan for my plane, and I don't necessarily know that, and I don't necessarily get a vote in that. So in that example, I would also highlight who's the chicken and who's the pig. Right? To the ground guys, I'm the chicken. They have the skin in the game. But in an Air Force context, I'm the pig. I'm the one with my skin in the game. The maintenance guys and support guys in the background are the ones getting me launched, getting me out there. Another neat example of this in the military is security forces and military police. Now, in some senses, that's ops. right? When they're out doing their mission, they're operating in some sense. But in some senses, they're support. Their job is to keep the base from getting overrun while we're out flying the planes or delivering violence. So I like to joke that security forces gets to experience the best of both worlds. They get the crappy schedule of operations and the lack of respect that goes with support in a lot of cases. But that's actually true in a lot of organizations. What is operations to you is someone else's support function. And understanding kind of that relationship in any given instant will help you kind of navigate situations.
So this is actually something I can relate really well to as a canine guy. I barely ever see my boss. I might see my boss once a week, maybe. And there are weeks where I might see him more or less, but my direct supervisor in canine is not a guy that I have to really interact with a whole lot. He does a lot of administrative stuff. I call him if I need something, but for the most part, there's a lot of autonomy. But my job as a canine guy is to go support patrol. And while I'm out there supporting patrol, I deal with patrol supervisors who legitimately outrank me, right? And they have control of whatever operation we're going to.
They have tactical control of the situation.
They're
right?
the incident commanders and such.
Yep.
And so I don't technically work for them, but they're in charge. And when it comes to things like specialized units, this is a very important thing. Is you can see, and in the past, we've had periods of time where we were accused of not having a great relationship with patrol. And I would argue that where that came from might be part of the problem, but that's another story for another day. But the idea is that if we drove a wedge and we kind of separated ourselves too much from patrol, then they're not gonna want to call us. They're not gonna want our help. They're gonna be like, no, we actually don't need you here. We got this by ourselves. You can leave. And so in specialized units, you're always fighting for relevance. You have to fight for relevance and building relationships and making sure that you recognize in that case that even though you're out there doing an operational piece of something, you are still there to support someone as well. And you have to remember what the big objective is, right? You have to remember that there's a lot more to be said about just your role in the thing, right? What's the mission?
I have a great example of that. I used to work with an organization that did a bunch of airdrop, right? Cargo planes doing airdrop stuff. And they made it so painful to the Army guys to do airdrop. The Army guys literally contracted it out. They had some defense contractor come in and do their airdrops for them because they were so annoying to have the C-130s do it that they just didn't. They just cut a check, and then the contractors didn't give them any guff.
They hit up like UPS or FedEx, like, hey, can you guys?
Yep.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, this is important, right? So even if you are a quote unquote operator, you still have someone that you're out there supporting in terms of supporting the mission, right? And like Jim alluded to earlier, which we're going to hit on more in a little bit, but this is the essence of teamwork. It's recognizing some of this, right? And as it relates to things like special operations or specialized units, if you think about the military context, special ops by itself does not, and for the most part cannot, prop up the entire defense industry by themselves. Right. So I'll use the example, and Jim can elaborate on this all he wants. But if some special operations ground force is out in the middle of the desert somewhere in whatever place, and they get eyes on a target and intel on a target for an air guy to come in and do an airstrike, and the mission is not to go get any kind of ground contact, right? Like it's just to get the target for the air guys to come and blow up. That's the mission. The mission is to destroy the whatever that objective is, right? And the air guys did that supported by the guys on the ground who found and identified and marked the target, right? So even if you're the operator, you're supporting a greater part of the mission.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, depending on the operation, sometimes the special ops guys are the supporting force, as in they're there to support the conventional forces. And sometimes there's the supported force. The conventional force is there to support them. And that can get pretty contentious.
That's role general there, yeah.
Yeah. But in that context of soft team getting eyes on, this is an important and fundamental part of teamwork, is realizing you are one element in a bigger picture and recognizing how you will impact both the other elements and the bigger picture. And that sometimes, like, the work isn't always sexy or glamorous, but it can be very, very important. And from that intel perspective, I mean, the intel gathering could take years, where like you might be watching a guy for an entire deployment and never see any action on him. It could get very frustrating, right? Because you want to do things. It's why you joined. Do things. But you got to sit there and just watch. And then you go home and somebody else schwacks him. You're like, "Argh."
Yeah.
But hey, the team got him, right? Team America got him.
The same sort of thing has happened with us. So, yeah, even those, the special ops, yeah, they have their own support people. But again, we have to look at the difference between the internal and the external customers, and not always, just because it's who you're supporting or helping out doesn't mean they're your boss. Those are different people. But like Jim is saying, there's a bigger picture, and the mission is the point, right? The objective. So what are some of the ways the operators might support the support guys? The best example I could come up of for this was some years back, we got these new radios, and they had a lot more features and stuff. And there was like you transition any technology, there's always a learning curve and little kinks you have to iron out, right? And we got these new radios, and every year we got them all squared away, right? We had issues, we got them fixed, and then every year they'd come through and they'd do an update, and they would undo all the things that we had them fix. And we're like, you guys messed up our radios. We need you to do, and it got to a point where even though we had a pretty good idea of what we needed, they made it so bureaucratically challenging. Like there was so much red tape. They're like, well, we need all the radios to be consistent. We can't have individual units coming in and making all these changes. And so those requests have to go through some process. And it was like, okay, well, how long is that going to take? Because this is like mission critical. Like we need this fixed like right now. And the guys doing this, the guys programming these radios and dealing with these features, they don't understand our job, really. They like fundamentally they understand it, but they don't know.
They understand radios.
Yeah.
Right. They understand making the trons work in the radio.
Right. But they don't understand how these things how it makes a difference to us, these little things, right? And if you think about public safety communications, like that is essentially, not only is it critical for operations across the county or whatever region, but also it's kind of its own operation if you think about it. Like communications is a big, what's the word? Like not structure. It's like its own its own organism, right? Like its own mechanism, its own like, whole thing.
Its own thing.
Yeah. Whole thing, technical term. So if it is a critical piece of the operation and its own operation in and of itself, like, is it support or ops? And sure, it supports the guys out in the field, right? You would think that the responders need that as a support function. But also, for those guys to do their operation well, it needs to make sense for the guys out in the field. And so if they're not getting the support from you going in there and saying, hey, like, this is what we need. These are the, no one to communicate that, no one to help sell them and guide them in the right direction or iron out the process if that's what it takes to try to get changes, then it doesn't really matter, because then the two things don't connect well, right? The interface between the communications side of the operation and the guys in the field part of the operation. So the distinction is the part of it that is operationally relevant to you or your objective isn't necessarily relevant to everybody else. You're just one piece of the puzzle. No matter where you're at, you're one piece of the puzzle. And what you're trying to do is build bridges, right? Break down the silos. That's kind of the goal.
Level the bubbles. We like to say that at work.
That's interesting. So back to some of the operations and support stuff. Let me give you, I mentioned earlier how specialized units, specialty units need to kind of fight for their own relevance, right? And making sure that they stay gainfully employed. That's the trick. Making sure that you still have a job. Because if you don't, what happens to your budget and all those things, right? And so let's say for law enforcement, right? Patrol, the cops out in the field are the ones that answer the calls. They take the 911 calls. So if there is a shooting, for example, we'll say a drive-by, and cops go to the shooting, there's a victim, there's an investigation that happens, the patrol kind of sets that up. And then there's detectives. The detectives go out there and they do their detecting, and they identify the shooter, the suspect, right? And then the surveillance teams get the info about the shooter and they do their workup and they do their intel and support stuff, and they go out and they find the suspect. And then you got guys like me, the SWAT and the K9 guys. We do, we're the closer, right? We go and finish it, right? We go wrap them up. And then just like in Law and Order, you've got a team of prosecutors who, right, attorneys that go and work the case through to a trial at jury.
In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate but equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the prosecutors who prosecute.
I knew I didn't have to look up
shit.
that because Jim would have it locked down.
Classic.
So in terms of operations and support, who can we cut out of that chain? So if the guy's out in the field, the patrol, we normally think of that 911 response as operations. I mean, are they all operations? Is all of it critical to the operational function of the organization? Because then we take it a step further. Patrol we talked about the communications staff, right? We've got records staff, all the report writing, the whole IT, everything about IT and how we write our reports to keep track of all that information is a whole other part of it. You've got the detectives have their own analysts. They have crime scene investigators. Surveillance has stuff and things available to them to help them locate and get eyes on people. SWAT and K9, we have our own structure and our own support. So again, these lines get really blurry, right? And we haven't even gotten into things like commanders and organizational figureheads. Here's a question for you. Is the chief of police operational or support? What kind of role? Think about it. Like, which one's sexier? Everyone likes to think operations, but is the chief out there answering 911 calls? Not normally, right? Kind of more of a support role if you think about it. But that's kind of the essence of leadership, right? Depending on how you look at it.
Very few good things happen when they do. I can think of one example where a police chief was on an active shooter event and we had a bad outcome from it, right?
Yeah. Awkward. You have the whole political framework, right? That's how we get our funding and stuff like that. You have all the administrative stuff, like we said earlier, about getting paid and making sure that patrol cars have gas. So my point is, even within operations, there are still support roles and the lines get kind of fuzzy. And I think the key is to see that even if you quote unquote operate, you need those guys.
I'm an operator.
Yeah. But you need those guys.
I got the cool boots and the cool watch. I'm an operator. Yeah.
And it's also to embrace the times that you also are one of those guys, that you also are a support piece as well. So that kind of leads us to the real message in all of this, which is mostly about synergy and teamwork. And we talked about, Jim's alluded to this several times, in that, together everyone achieves more. And I mentioned we're all parts of the puzzle. One of my favorite talks, there's a guy named Randy Pausch. He was a professor. I'll let you Google him. We'll put a link in. So his name was Randy Pausch, and he gave a talk called his last lecture. He was dying of pancreatic cancer, and there's a whole lot that goes into this. I encourage you to watch it. It's a little bit long, but it's worth your time, and there's a lot more into it than you probably realize at face value. But one of the things that he talked about is, did he accomplish his childhood dreams? Like, he's dying of cancer, and he was positive until the end about it. And what were his dreams? And one of his dreams was to play NFL. And, he talked about, he never made it to the NFL, but he did play football. And he remembered, he had all these good memories. And one of the memories was of some coach that he had back in the day. And they showed up to football practice and there weren't any footballs. And he's like, I don't understand. There's It's football practice. There's no footballs. How are we going to? And he's like, right. How many people are on the field at a time? There's X on this team and Y on this team. And how many at any given time are holding the football? One of them. And sometimes for a period of time, 0. So we're going to focus on all the other things that have to go into this, right? And I like that analogy because we're going to focus on all the other things. Sometimes you're not going to be the one that scores the winning touchdown, right? Or that makes the big play, makes the big pass. Sometimes you got to block for that guy, right? Sometimes, you're the dude that needs to help your team get to the next level so that they can make the plays even if you get hurt. So that is a big part of teamwork, is to wrap your head around things like that. There's actually one other little nugget I'm going to give you out of this talk that he gave. He one of his other childhood dreams is it had something to do with becoming an astronaut, and there was this thing that his students wanted to do about getting onto this airplane ride that they did these big arcs. And it gave you like a feeling of weightlessness at some part of the arc. So it felt like you were in space for like a minute.
The Vomit Comet. Yeah.
What's it called?
The Vomit Comet.
Vomit Comet. Yeah. I don't know a lot about it, but there was this thing that you can go and you could get sponsored to go on these trips on the Vomit Comet or whatever. And it was a plane ride, but it was a, relatively high altitude, high speed sort of thing. And they do these big ups and downs so that you would get this feeling of weightlessness, this 0G kind of experience. And he was talking about trying to get a group of his students to go on it. And they were like, yeah, but faculty's not allowed. And, and he said he had some way of articulating how, yeah, but, what about journalists? Journalists are allowed so they can report on it and let them do. And they're like, yeah, but you don't look like a media guy. And he's like, well, I'm
whoever you need me to be right now.
Yeah. And they're like, and I don't remember the story precisely, but they said something like, I remember the quote that he uses in that. That's a little transparent, don't you think? And they're like, well, it's your rules. Right. And so he was able to talk his way into going on this trip with the students, even though technically faculty wasn't supposed to be a part of it. It was for the students, and they had a great time and it was cool. But the whole point of that is like the faculty guy is obviously supporting the mission of the students in that case. And he wanted to go. So it was important to him as well, but they had to they reverse engineered the process a little bit to make sure that he can get kind of the win out of it. Right. So it's just kind of
the process,
a cool part of the story.
Yeah.
This is Mike, and I just want to jump in real quick to announce our new partnership with Brink Drones. Brink has created life-saving capabilities in a drone that can break windows, fly into houses and confined spaces, and even crash into things and stay in the air with advanced pilot assistance that does not use GPS. Brink drones are built in the USA. It has night vision and IR that can function in blacked out and zero light conditions. It can flip itself back over, and it is a flying cell phone with two-way communication and a live video feed. It can even carry and drop off items for hostage negotiators with the payload feature. Brink has a really cool and compelling heritage that came to be after the 1 October mass shooting at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, and they are committed in their mission to leverage technology to save lives. And I can tell you firsthand that their drones will do just that by flying into places that are too dangerous to risk human lives. If you work in public safety, your agency needs to see what this drone can do. Go check out Brink Drones at brinkdrones.com, or feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to tell you all about them. Again, that's Brink, BRINC, drones.com.
So navigating processes, it turns out, is one of the big challenges of the ops and support relationship. Big challenges, I find, because operations as a function tends to be very results heavy. It's a results oriented world. Either you won or you lost. You lived or you died, right? The plane launched or it didn't. And because of that, people who do ops as a career tend to really struggle with processes. They hit a rule book like that says, your faculty can't go. And you're like, well,
why not?
Do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And support as a function tends to be very process heavy. They have rules. For good reasons they have rules, and for good reasons they have processes. And sometimes the support guys never even see the results. So all they ever see is the process. And I see that cause a lot of friction. A lot of the problems, a lot of the hurt feelings come from this exact thing, the results versus processes relationship. And it often comes from a lack of organizational empathy. Neither side tries very hard to understand the other side. That is a foul. Now, there's a process to getting a travel voucher paid in the military, probably also in your police department, right? There's a form you got to fill out. And if you don't fill out the form, you're hosed, right? And you can yell at the finance guy all you want, but if you don't follow the process, you will not get paid. And there's probably good reasons for that, probably because people have screwed it up in the past or defrauded the government in the past. Okay? So you have to learn the process, even if you're the ops guy and you're too good for the process. You still got to learn it. You still got to follow it. But there's a flip side to that. First, as a support guy, you need to be really careful about the processes you build and about educating your supported forces on those processes. If they have to take an inordinate amount of time to figure out your process, that takes time away from their critical training and operations. Their job, the mission of the organization, gets cut in order to figure out your process. And I've actually had this happen. I've had it happen a couple different ways. I had Army guys fill out an airdrop request form wrong. They copied and pasted the wrong grid into the request form.
Sounds important.
And so the wrong fob got resupplied. Saw it happen, right? And was that the supported force's fault or the supporting force's fault? Yeah, a little both. A little shared responsibility there, but I've seen it happen. I've had it happen to me with a clerical error that turned off my military life insurance. I have quite a bit of military life insurance, and I noticed, only because I noticed I got paid like $8 extra one month. And I was like, wait a second, the government never gives me more money. What is happening here, right? And I start going through it, and sure enough, it showed in the notes like my SGLI, my serviceman's life insurance had gotten turned off. So I had to take a day away from work, an entire work day of flying, of operating, of knocking out my training requirements so that I could be combat mission ready. I had to take a day out of my life to go to the base finance office and get it fixed. And they're like, oh, our bad. And when we started digging into it, it was literally one airman like checked the wrong box. They were supposed to like add my kid as a beneficiary, and instead they just said I turned it off altogether.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. So if I had died before that got fixed, they would have left my family with no life insurance, and they would have told my wife that I turned it off, even though I didn't. That's a foul. Like that's a big one. Okay. And I can't explain how blindingly mad I was over that. Now, support is important, and support actions have consequences, but there was no accountability there, and that got a lot of hurt feelings. Okay, going back to that chicken and pig, skin in the game thing. The finance troop who messed up my paperwork probably didn't even hear about it. Probably didn't even know it was a thing. If I messed up that bad as a pilot, I would be a smoking hole in the ground.
Yeah, one job,
Skin
buddy.
in the game.
One job.
Right? One job.
Yeah.
And I do need to understand your process as a supported force. I need to, and I need to navigate it. But I can't be both good at my job and good at your job. It just doesn't work. I just don't have enough brain bites. I can't do it.
Inefficient.
It's inefficient at best, and it's dangerous at worst. Okay? The other thing is that your process had goddamn well better deliver a useful and timely outcome, which means when you track your processes, you have to track the wins and losses of those processes. And if the process is broken, fix it. My classic example of this is how some organizations handle broken computers. If my computer is broken, and the only way I can get it fixed is to log into a computer and submit a trouble ticket work order, but I can't because my computer is broken and I can't log in to submit the trouble ticket, then your process sucks. And having a little empathy about that is what makes your process better and what makes your supporting agency better. And when you make a process or when you change a process, I need you to stop and ask if you are doing it to make life easier for you or easier for your supported force, your customer. And whenever you can, I want you to make it easier for your customer. Being ferocious about customer service is a sign of eliteness in a military and law enforcement context, right? I would, as a aircraft pilot, I would never ever tell my customers, the Army guys, that I'm closed for training. Like, on no planet would that happen. At no planet would I not answer the phone when they call. Right? When they call, I gosh darn better answer. And if the entire military worked like that, we would get a lot more done, I think.
Yeah, and this stuff all boils down to organizational behavior and culture. If you think about the culture of your organization, and at the very beginning, Jim was talking about how pilots are perceived a certain way. And what I've experienced is
douchebags, a lot of douchebags.
Yeah. And what I've experienced is, you know, as guys from specialized unit, SWAT and K9, we've had the same sort of reputation over the years. And sometimes that was earned and deserved, right? But one of the big things that is prominent in our little subculture, right, on a tactical team or a specialized unit is, you know, again, we're always fighting for that relevance and we're always trying to better serve the customers. And so we spend a lot of time trying to improve. And that means doing real critical, real honest debriefs. And we've created a culture in which there are no holds barred. Like, the door gets closed, everything stays in the room, but it's going to be brutally honest. We're not going to pull any punches, right? So from time to time, if someone from that organization, from one of those units, is out in the patrol world, right? With the normies, if I dare say something like that, but just, you know, with the masses, with the other
gen
groups.
pop, the general population.
Yeah, there you go. Right. And it's not a class thing. I say it in a teasing and loving way, but my point is this: it gets perceived poorly because of an ego thing, right? And sometimes it's a matter of how you sell it and how you explain it and how diplomatic you can be. But other times it's just that they're not used to working in that same way that we are. We're two different groups of people. And you have to, again, have like some empathy for that, right?
Absolutely.
And then Jim mentioned the eliteness thing. And if everyone functioned the way that he does when it comes to answering the ground party, we'd get a lot accomplished. And if you look at a lot of the really big and really successful organizations, you can dissect stuff like that and figure out like what made them giants, what made them so successful. And I'll give you actually a really recent example. Brink, one of our sponsors, they make tactical drones. They fly indoors and do all kinds of cool stuff. They just had a launch event for a brand new drone that they're releasing. And I went to their building in Seattle, their headquarters, and it's a freaking cool building. Like, it's this, I mean, you just got to see it. It's a cool place, cool looking place. And one of they had a recruiting guy there that was like, yeah, you know, if you think about it, when I have an engineer coming in here and he's applying for a job, like, I want them they're interviewing us too, because they could go other places. And I want them to come in here and see this place as like a playground, like somewhere they want to be, they want to work. And think about the culture in a company like that, where they see someone coming in to apply for a job as an interview themselves. Operations versus support, right? Like, they're looking at that as a two-way street from the very, very beginning. And if you take that a step further, one of the things that Brink did, they started in Las Vegas, and they eventually expanded, and then they had their engineering team out in Seattle, but the production was still happening in Las Vegas. And one of the big things they did over the last year was move all the production to Seattle, where all the engineers are. And the idea behind that was they wanted the engineers and the production team to be co-located, to work together, because they wanted to break down the silos between engineering and production, because they're hand in hand, right? They're one and the same. So think about where those silos exist in your organization. Think about what things need to be more collaborative, right? Instead of like independent us versus them. And I make the jokes about the Gen Pop versus, specialized units thing. But this is the reality, is that from a canine perspective, I'm taking patrol guys out with me every time I go search with my dog somewhere. We integrate with patrol all the time. But even now in 2023 on a tactical team, we integrate with our surveillance teams and provide surveillance support for them all the time. And there are times where suddenly we're in the best spot to have the best eyes on. Even if we're not making, we're not doing our thing right then, we might still be in that role where, hey, we have eyes on the guy, so we have the air. And similarly, if you think about like active killer response, this has been the big paradigm shift over the last 20, 25 years. That's a patrol problem, not a SWAT problem. So where has patrol learned a lot about how to respond to those things? From a lot of people with tactical experience. They're the ones that end up being the instructors for that sort of stuff. And now the way that we would respond to an active killer event in most areas is going to heavily integrate those tactical teams. The guys that start showing up from the tactical team are going to be integrated with patrol. There's a lot of integration happening. You have to break down those silos. And I'm sure Jim's got military examples of how conventional ops have become a lot more special in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah. A lot of crossover. So ops and support also tend to have wildly different cultures and schedules. And the schedule kind of drives the culture a little bit, right? This is one of the biggest friction points I also see in the military. One of the benefits of working personnel or finance is that it's an office job. That's one of the things that makes it like a good job in a lot of cases, that you get to work in an office. You're not sleeping in the mud. And you're usually working business hours. And I don't fault anyone for that. I often work business hours because I'm an officer. I work in an office. The problem is that ops and maintenance and security guys and a bunch of the other functions work 24 hours. So to get support, they have to come in the middle of their sleep cycle. They have to physically get to you, which sometimes means traveling. They have to get across the base. They have to get across the compound. So they have to stop their work during the workday, get to you, sit in line, take a number, check in, make an appointment, whatever that is. They have to restructure their day around trying to get support. And then they get there and they see a sign on the door that's saying your office is closed for training or closed for a luncheon. And that breeds real resent. People who are already probably a little spring-loaded toward that.
Annoyed,
then see that sign and it just drives them crazy, right? So what can you do about it? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe you don't have the manning and you're just hosed. You could just throw up your hands. You could. I don't recommend it, though. Think about your alternatives. Could you schedule a monthly or weekly overnight support session where you're available late at night so that the swing shift guys and the night shift guys can come and get help from you? Can you come visit the ops and maintenance and security units? Can you come do a staff visit? Hey, we're here, we'll fill out your paperwork. We'll get your wills knocked out, whatever it is you need late at night at your workplace, not at our workplace. Can you support by email? Sometimes, every function now has like a portal that you can log into. But if we make everything self-service, we go back to me doing your job and my job, right? So that's not always useful unless that self-service function is really slick. And it almost never is.
Yeah, so wrapping up on this, I think the key lesson in this is make sure you can see the big picture. And it's not about being the guy or thinking that you're the guy that carries the whole team or the whole effort. It's about making sure that you carry your own share of the work and that you're enabling and supporting the other people in your organization or your team to support theirs, so that the sum of our efforts is greater than the individual parts. And that is the essence of synergy, the essence of teamwork. And with that, there's a saying, again, I'm going to go back to the egos and why are SWAT guys like SWAT guys. And, one of our team leaders has a saying. He says, I know it says special on your patch, but we ain't special. We're nothing special. We're not anybody special. We're just doing our thing. We have our own kind of work carved out for us, our own little slice of the pie. And damn it, we're going to be really good at that one piece, right? And so make sure that you carry your weight. That's how it goes. I think that's all I got, Jim.
I like that. As a leader on either side or whatever side, it is your job to manage and close that gap between ops and support functions. No matter which side you're on, if you're a leader, you got to help fix that gap. And a lot of that starts with empathy. The key here is trying to see the world from the other side's perspective. So, for example, if you're an Air Force guy, that's my frame of reference. In a support job, get out of your office. Go spend a day with the ops and maintenance and security guys. See what their schedules are like. See what it's like to work overnight in the cold at Minot Air Force Base or whatever base you're at in North Dakota. To see what work goes into getting a jet ready. Or to land at 2 a.m. and see the base mini-mart shopette is closed. And like, where are you going to eat? Well, we have box lunches for you. Yeah, the 300th time I eat a box lunch, it's like the same, like, it's literally like it's not a Lunchable, it's a Uncrustable. You get an Uncrustable and like a box of juice, and you're like, thanks, guys, that's a big help.
My 3-year-old would be ecstatic.
That's right. And if you're on the ops side, go send an emissary, a representative, to learn from the support guys and really learn their processes. Send a guy and figure out the finance process, figure out the personnel processes and their problems, and invite them over to see and experience ops. If you're flying airplanes, get some support guys in those airplanes. It's a little tough in an F-35 is a tight fit, or an A-10 or whatever, but there are a lot of planes you can fit a lot of dudes in. Maybe throw them on a tanker if you're in a single seat aircraft wing. But get them up and flying. The more you do, usually the better everything works. And one of the most helpful things you can do is bring them in for opposition forces. Have them be role players. You get synergy there, right? So to answer the question, why are pilots like that? Well, I can't speak for all pilots, but I can tell you why I'm like that. Partly because I'm a douchebag, right? But mostly it's because I know I'm a support weenie. And that's important. It's ironic, but it's true. We're coming from a place of humility. I know that I exist to support some 20-year-old Army kid sleeping in the mud, or some Navy SEAL who's counting on me to get him out of a bad situation. And I take that really, really seriously, that they are the pig and I know I'm the chicken. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let them down. Or tell them they're not getting support because they didn't fill out the form correctly. And I am obsessive about that and compulsive about that and fierce about it because I'm all about customer support. And I want everyone to be fierce about customer support. I think that's all I got.
It's well said. I think build bridges, break down silos, have empathy, be humble. That's good.
Level the bubbles. Yeah. Or just get out of your office and go talk to people. I think that really will help. Get out of your office, go talk, learn their process.
Have beers, share stories,
Hell yeah.
Easy stuff.
And actually that's a good point. I have found in very many cases, support guys never find out what the base is even doing. Sometimes it's so super classified, you can't tell them or whatever, but in most cases you can.
Yeah. I could see. Okay, I actually have a good example of this I just thought of right now. I wish I had thought of it. I could have put this farther in the episode somewhere, but years and years ago when I was a field training officer and I had a rookie cop with me, we went to a call where a 25-year-old lady murdered her 2 kids. It was a 4 or 5-year-old girl and an 18-month-old boy that she shot with a pistol several times. And then tried to slice her abdomen open with like a box cutter and didn't do a very good job. And so the mom survived and obviously went to, got locked up. But the kids were dead. And the way the call comes out, sometimes when you hear these calls and it's something like that, you think it's fake. You're like, if it sounds too crazy to be true, it probably isn't. Most of the time. And like when we got there and you could hear it in the voices of everyone that showed up on scene in the first part of it, it was real. And after the call, I went into the dispatch center and I was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know what happened and what we saw. And sometime later, they did like a group, like critical incident debrief kind of thing where we got, everyone got to share their thoughts and stuff. And, but for years, ever since then to this day, I mean, I've been out of patrol for 10 years. And to this day, a decade later, over a decade later, I still get asked all the time to go give a presentation to all the communications trainees. When they hire new dispatchers and call takers, they ask me to come in and give a talk to them. And it's different people now. But when it first started, the lady that did that always told that story, and she's like that we never hear the outcomes. We don't ever get that feedback. And that's a relationship that's stuck for over a decade between my unit and them. So just something to think about. A little bit more of a personal example than necessarily about our unit per se, but that's the kind of stuff that goes a long way, just having a conversation and sharing experiences. So
I like it. Be safe out there, be smart out there. Go talk to people, get out of your office. That's all I got.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you.
This episode is also brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Ammo is hard to find these days, and you need to stay proficient by working your dry fire training. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem in dry fire of constantly having to rack your slide to reset the trigger. With Dry Fire Mag, all you do is clear your weapon, load this training mag up, and work on your trigger work. Check them out on dryfiremag.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can have our Patreon. Give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.